If we join together, amplify each other, hold each other up, explore each other technologies with curiosity, even if it's not our own pet solution, then we are going to be a more formidable force in the world. And there's frankly, like, our biggest enemy is not anybody who's pro-nuclear at all.
The Rational View is a weekly series hosted by me, Dr. Alan Scott, providing a rational, evidence-based perspective on important societal issues.
Produced by Soapbox Media.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Rational View. In this episode, I'm interviewing a fellow supporter of nuclear energy who, although not a Canadian, she posted an article on Canada Day singing the praises of the CANDU reactor. I think CANDU is an underappreciated technological wonder, similar in a way to the Avro Arrow. It is also at risk of going down that same path unless Canadians rise up and tell their MPs and MPPs that we need more of them. If you like what you're hearing, please press like on your podcast app and share it with your friends. I'd love to hear comments from you on my Facebook group, The Rational View. Angelica Oung is a journalist specializing in Asia and energy matters, living in Taipei, Taiwan. In her spare time, she's a nuclear energy enthusiast and advocate, known as the Manic Nuclear Scheme Girl on her Substack. Angelica, welcome to The Rational View.
Hi, Al. Thank you so much for having me. It's always a great day to talk about nuclear.
So, I've seen you on the internet, on social media. You're very active. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and how you got interested in nuclear energy?
Well, it all actually started when I started working as a business reporter in Taiwan about 2 years ago. Before that, I had very basic normie views on nuclear energy. I thought it was dangerous. I thought it was contaminating. I thought it was on the way out, but mostly I didn't think much about it at all. But then I started being a business journalist in Taiwan, where the power crunch is real. We don't have enough electricity capacity for the amount of industry we have going on in our little island. And I realized that one of the main reasons why this is so is because we are retiring nuclear energy um, quite earlier than expected. Basically, we planned a whole bunch of nuclear capacity, including a brand spanking new advanced boiling water reactor that has just never been used because the current administration decided to phase out nuclear by 2025. The more I learned about nuclear, the more I realized that it really wasn't as scary as everybody made it out to be. I myself was shocked when I found out that nobody actually died in Fukushima in 2011. And basically, I realized that not everybody has the advantage of a midlife career change to put them in front of the information, the facts, that actually clearly states something is not as it seems. So that is why, in my spare time, I have become something of a nuclear energy advocate. I think it's that important. And most of my, other, I'm actually not a huge, I'm not a huge activist in other aspects of my work. I'm just a journalist. I do some reporting. I do some analysis. My work has appeared in the Telegraph. I used to work for the Taipei Times. And I actually do a lot of my bread and butter comes from my work in the offshore wind supply chain. I'm an industrial reporter. But my passion is nuclear because I simply think that it is one of the very rare occasions in life where it really is that easy. Thanks to the great work done by our fellow humans before us, we basically have something that is low carbon and highly energetically efficient and dense and can solve a lot of our problems. And we're simply not recognizing it. It's a huge free lunch that is not getting eaten.
It's great to have journalists on side with nuclear energy. Time and again, you find that they're basically just swallowing the story that's out there about nuclear not being green, or that they're swallowing the rhetoric from the anti-nuclear lobby. So it's great to have critical minds out there reporting on this. Do you get any blowback or any feedback for taking what is potentially an unpopular opinion in your journalism?
Oh, absolutely. Before I go into that, let me explain to you a little bit about how the sausage is made, journalistically speaking. Right now, I'm more concentrated in a couple of areas in my journalism. But before, as a business reporter, I basically carried energy as a part of my. I wasn't really that specialized in nuclear. I don't think there are that many reporters that are that specialized in nuclear. So, I could be writing one story that's about one aspect of, let's say, I could be writing a story about laptops one day and offshore wind the other, and then to have a story about nuclear. And it's very difficult when you're going into a topic that's highly controversial, fairly cold. It can be hard for a journalist that only has to write a story about nuclear maybe once a year or a couple of times a year to truly have the working knowledge that's required to actually play it fair down the middle. So they end up listening to one side and they listen to the other side, and they just kind of take a little bit from this and a little bit from that. Um, and unfortunately, that's how a lot of the mainstream news gets made. But I also think it's interesting. Sometimes I would post a mainstream piece and say, "This is a good piece of nuclear," and my nuclear advocates friend was like, "What are you talking about? There's all this untruth in it." And they listened to this guy who was like full of BS and whatever. I'm just like, no, no, this is good. If you have to look at the placement, where's the critic coming in? Where is the nuclear advocate coming in? Is the nuclear advocate getting more airtime? And if on balance, they're getting good airtime and good placement, that piece is positive for nuclear overall. Um, in my personal life, obviously, when I'm writing professionally, I'm not an advocate. So, I could be writing about anything. I don't bring up nuclear advocatism, out of context. So it's really been getting more blowback personally rather than professionally. Um, the platform where I got, I would say 90% of the blowback and hate is actually Facebook. And it's from people who are strongly anti nuclear, um, who are my friends. And that actually makes it a lot more hurtful because they would accuse me of being paid for by big nuclear. Like, excuse me, where's my check from big nuclear? I've been waiting, and there's no checks from big nuclear. Meanwhile, I am like, and I don't want to malign the industry because obviously I believe that I'm, you know, obviously I am working in it, but offshore wind has been extremely lucrative for me in terms of subscriptions and sponsorships for my work in it. And I do good work. I'm proud of my work, but nobody ever questions it. Whereas nuclear, where all my work is absolutely just out of love and as an advocate, people question my motivations. People question my ability. People question my knowledge, and I find that very disappointing coming from friends. But can also accept that this is how deep anti-nuclear sentiments have gone. That they would question a friend that they know is a respected journalist, and they would never otherwise question her integrity or intelligence, but they will do it in the context of nuclear power.
Oh, that's sad. Yeah, I was also going to ask if you're getting paid for this because you put together recently a Happy Canada Day article praising the CANDU reactors. And, we Canadians are always suspicious about foreign praise. We have something of an inferiority complex here living next to the US all the time, which, get the majority of the news and the things happening to them. So thank you for that wonderful article that you wrote on the CANDU. And you're not a shill. This is real heartfelt praise for the CANDU reactor. So thank you very much.
No, no, and I'm totally I'm not opposed, by the way, to getting paid in the future for my work in nuclear at all. I think there's absolutely if I can do what I do for offshore wind in nuclear, I would be a happy woman, by the way. And what I do for offshore wind is I'm a supply chain reporter. I report on the supply chain, and I would absolutely love to do that for nuclear. There simply hasn't been the opportunity yet for me. But in terms of the CANDU, the reason I focused on it is simply because it's such a great story. That's how it first caught my attention. The story of a bunch of scientists, basically during World War II, when the Nazis began to make gains, all the scientists ran from the continent to Britain. And then Britain started looking not necessarily safe. So they all decamped to Canada so that they can continue their work. And they ended up in Chalk River. That's how Canada ended up with one of the most
It's
advanced.
down the road from me.
Oh, yeah, yeah. It's legendary nuclear laboratory,
Yeah.
and they did a lot of good work there. And at the end of World War II, you have to remember back then, nuclear is not like the way it is now. It was really the future. Everybody wanted to be in on it. And Canada didn't really have the heavy industry to produce nuclear power plants the way everybody else was doing it, which is with those heavy duty reactors, reactor vessels. That requires forging abilities that they simply didn't have back in the day. Actually, they don't have now. Actually, a lot of countries don't have now. The US used to do it. They kind of forgot. It's amazing. But anyhow, Canada back in the 50s certainly didn't have the ability to make that vessel that's basically at the heart of every other nuclear power plant. But it just so happens that in Chalk River, down the road from you, they were during the war. They were making experimental reactors with heavy water as a moderator and vacuum tubes. This is a totally different structure from other nuclear reactors, and mm, they they thought, well, maybe we can take this research reactor and turn it towards power use. And this has interesting ramifications later on. But back then, I believe they did it for two reasons. Simply because it's easier to manufacture the vacuum tubes if you have a lower industrial base. And the other reason being the heavy water is a much more efficient moderator for the nuclear fission reaction. And you can use natural uranium rather than enriched uranium. Canada is rich in mineral resources, including a lot of uranium. But in the enrichment of uranium is another.
Before we go on,
Yeah.
just I, I want to explain what you mean by moderator for neutrons. So when you have a fission reaction, the uranium splits into and releases these very fast neutrons, and the neutrons escape from the uranium, and they go through just about anything. They don't do much. If you want them to create a chain reaction, you have to slow them down so that they spend more time in the uranium. So they're more likely to create another fission reaction, and this is how you get a chain reaction or a critical state in the core. And the heavy water slows down those fast neutrons so that they can make more fission products. So they make more energy, more heat, and provide more energy. So I just wanted to just do a little aside for everyone who doesn't know all of the technology. And the technology, I think, of CANDU, it's a wonderful design. What are the advantages of the CANDU design?
Well, thank you, Al, for slowing up. That's a great, you're a great educator, and reminds me not to completely run away without addressing the fundamentals. So first of all, let's look at the name, right? CANDU. What does it stand for? Canadian deuterium uranium. And the deuterium part is the heavy water. And I I have to try and, fast forward to, a year ago, I wouldn't know what deuterium is at all. It's basically water with one of the hydrogens with an extra neutron on it. So, as you were, very clearly and lucidly describing, when you have this fusion chain reaction and you have these neutrons zipping about, you need to have a way to slow them down so that they can cause more fusion reactions and have more neutrons come out. And what happens is if you have a lot of neutrons zipping about and they knock into a regular light water particle, the water could just swallow up the neutron, and then that's the end of your neutron, and your neutron economy is not going to be that good. That is why you have to enrich uranium with more of the fissile isotope uranium 235 in order to sustain a chain reaction. Now, what happens when you use heavy water or deuterium as a moderator is that a deuterium already has an extra neutron in there. It's like they're already holding something. So when you throw a ball at them, they can't catch it. So instead of them catching this extra neutron and then holding onto it, then your neutron economy goes down. The neutron just kind of bounces off this deuterium particle, and it slows down, ready to knock into another uranium and causing another chain reaction. And this is why you can actually not only use natural uranium, of course, that would sustain the reaction, but also nuclear waste from other reactors. Or maybe we can call it, in this case, just nuclear spent fuel. If it's spent in a normal pressurized water reactor or boiling water reactor, it actually still has more fissile uranium 235 in it than natural uranium. So you can actually just go ahead, feed it into a CANDU, and get another 30% or so of energy out of it, theoretically. Now, it hasn't been like worth it to do almost yet because uranium is so plentiful. But it's absolutely something that should be explored, and that would get you more energy per volume of nuclear waste produced.
So the CANDU can burn what's called nuclear waste from American reactors effectively. We can use that. We can get even more energy out of it without doing anything to it.
Well, not yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yep, it's ready to go. I mean, obviously, it needs to be in the right form, and I don't know what it takes to do that, but it's ready to go in terms of just feeding it. Yeah, right shape, right bundles, and yeah, the CANDU uses um, these fuel, fuel bundles that are almost like logs in shape and size. It's like you have, if you lift it up, it looks like you're lifting a log, and then you look at it, it's like it's a bundle of zircaloy channels, and inside are the little pellets. And they're constantly feeding into to help you visualize the CANDU. It Instead of a centralized reactor, it's horizontal, and all those vacuum tubes are like you know, a bunch of channels in a much bigger. Imagine a big bundle of. Imagine getting a big bundle of chopsticks together and then turn it on its side. And that's kind of like the shape of the CANDU reactors, all contained in a big drum called the calandria. And each of those fuel channels take those bundles of fuel. And you're basically always fueling and refueling because we talked about using the natural uranium. So this here comes uh, another reason why CANDU is different, radically different from the other family of light water reactors. For every other reactor in the world, you fuel it up, you seal it up, you let it go for months, and then you have to refuel. And the refueling process can take a month, during which your reactor is not producing any power. For the CANDU, The refueling is done differently. You need to refill much more often. But to counter that, they have this horizontal refueling system that allows you to refuel continuously on one end, and the spent fuel it comes out of the other. So while you are fueling and refueling, your reactor never goes offline. And so I think it's maybe the Darlington, one of the Darlington units that has the record for being like the nuclear reactor being longest continuous online. And I forgot the exact date, but length, but maybe it's like 900 days, something really ridiculously long like that.
I think it's over 1,000.
Yeah, and so oh wow, okay, maybe I would not be surprised because while I read that piece, but it was still going strong then. So that obviously is an advantage for the grid. You don't have a big nuclear reactor plant going on and offline. But yeah, that is a unique aspect of the CANDU reactor.
And because that you're not using enriched uranium, the spent fuel from the CANDU also doesn't last as long, is not radioactive or as dangerous as long as the light water reactors, the pressurized U.S. designs that are so common. So the CANDUs, I think, are something like 10%. You had said of all reactors in the world are CANDU reactors. Is that correct?
Well, it's correct to the extent that I went to Wikipedia, looked up all the reactors in the world that they have listed, which is about 440. And if you count up the CANDUs, there's it comes out to around 10% if you count the Indian CANDU clones. They're called the Indian heavy in, Indian indigenous heavy water reactor, something like that. And they are CANDU-esque, so I count them as CANDUs. Um, but yeah, there are not that many of them left, and in addition to being a very small percentage of the total number of reactors, there aren't that many coming online, which I find really worrying, because I think for not just for all the reasons we discussed, but there's still a lot of innovation left in that design that we haven't realized yet.
Yeah. You highlighted in your article the fact that you had a friend, I think it was a Canadian friend, that wasn't even aware of the continuing existence of CANDU reactors, despite the
Yeah.
fact that they produce like 60% of Ontario's electricity and 15% of Canada's overall electricity. This is a common theme, Canadians underselling themselves and their technology. Those of us who understand the field of nuclear energy realize that the CANDU is like the Avro Arrow of nuclear. I don't know. Have you heard of the Avro Arrow?
No, no, what is it?
This was a fighter jet that Canadians developed back in the 60s. It was like a world leading fighter jet and was the fastest and the best fighter jet of its time. But Canada decided that because nuclear weapons were suddenly become intercontinental ballistic missiles were becoming a threat, that no one would need fighter jets anymore. So they stopped it and burnt the plans and discontinued the whole process. And I feel like we're at risk of the same thing with CANDU. We're going along that same path, and we need to stop it.
Yeah, well, I, you know, Al, I truly believe when something amazing is created, it doesn't just belong to your country anymore. It is the heritage of the whole world, and the country that invented it or developed it is only keeping it and guarding it and developing it, but it is a heritage of the world. And the Canadians absolutely, the CANDU is so good. I believe the Canadians um, really have a responsibility to keep this technology alive and develop it for the good of humanity. It is basically something that technology that we badly need for our future. Um, and no Canadian modesty cannot get in the way of humanity's future. Um, and I have to tell you, talking to my friend, I was just so amazed by how dismissive he was of the CANDUs. It was like something that was ancient history that didn't concern him and might even be somewhat uncool. It's just, oh, CANDUs? They still make those? Are there still any around? Wow, I haven't heard about them since I was in school. Wow, they're still going? Yeah. And to me, it's kind of incredible because not only is it a great story, um, it's a cool technology that still has so much left to give, and it's being treated shoddily by the Canadian government, I believe. Um, so basically, we know that we know that Canada actually is making plans for more nuclear plants. And they are going with the GE Hitachi BRX 300 small modular reactor design. There's nothing wrong with that reactor. It's a great reactor. It's going to be a workhorse for the nuclear industry going forward. Um, but why are the Canadians not championing their own technology? Why are they not supporting the CANDU with a supply chain that is 96% Canadian? Um, and they're supporting. Don't get me wrong. I love the BRX 300. It too has got championship DNA, and but I don't think it's any more like if you have two um two kids of equal potential in front of you, but one is your kid. Which one are you gonna be supporting and hopefully championing and setting up for success in the future? I just find it perplexing, especially when they are still
Yeah, no, I agree.
trying to. Yeah, and here's the thing: they're still trying to sell the CANDU to other countries as an export item. And this is, for obvious reasons. Of course, you want to sell your own technology. But how does it look to your potential buyers if you are trying to sell them this technology, trying to tell them how good it is? Meanwhile, you're not using it at home. You're not championing it at home. I
Yeah,
don't
no.
think that's a great
The,
look.
the government's dropped the ball.
Yeah.
I think back just after the Fukushima accident, the government provided an exclusive license to SNC-Lavalin on its on all the CANDU technology, and they provided this for $15 million,
Oh
basically
my
peanuts.
God. Oh my
After
God.
all the decades of development,
That's just giving away the store. And I hear it's not even such a great company. Yeah.
it's political toxic right now because
Yeah.
they've had some
Basically, that's all I've
scandals.
heard. Yeah.
And a couple of years later, I think Ontario was planning on building two more CANDUs at its Darlington site, but the government of the time decided to cancel the planned expansion, and they had this big fanfare. They introduced a Green Energy Act where they would subsidize solar and wind, and this was going to be the green ticket for Ontario. And of course, it continues to saddle us with billions of dollars in debt due to these 20-year fixed rate contracts for wind and solar, which are not much good in Canada. I mean, solar having a capacity factor below 15% in most cases, and wind produces out of sync with demand. So basically, it's all just curtailed. I think 25% of our wind energy is just curtailed or sold at a loss to the U.S. So I think after the first 4 or 5 years of this GEA, we were $37 billion in debt with negligible impacts to our overall green production of electricity. Um, and the weird thing about this is that several mainstream political parties in Canada are still anti-nuclear. How does this happen?
Well, to me, that is one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard in my life. You always think somewhere along the line, somebody is a grown up in government and they'll put their foot down when you're doing something completely ridiculous. And adding more wind and solar to a grid that is already low carbon is just the stupidest thing I can think of because you're adding intermittent source of energy, albeit low carbon, to a grid that's already stable and low carbon. And from what I understand, between the CANDUs and the hydro, Ontario was fine. Uh, I just don't understand how the government could be that financially
Every
irresponsible.
solar panel you add to the grid in Ontario makes our grid dirtier.
Wow. Wow. And this is the power of radiophobia. This is the power of decades of anti-nuclear information because I can't believe that you can do that to any other source of energy unless people just have such an inbuilt reaction against it being bad. And that's I really do believe that is the way forward. Is that you can't get political parties to change until you get public opinion to change, and public opinion needs to change for it's going to be a leading indicator. The public opinion is actually going to change before the politicians, and then they'll slowly get on board because they need the votes. So it all starts with changing hearts and minds one at a time, and it can be so discouraging. But just wow, that is such a own goal for the climate, such a own goal for Canada, for the Canadian taxpayers. Just about every way you slice it. I'm afraid the same thing is happening in Taiwan. We have nuclear reactors that we're shutting down prematurely or not opening at all. And now we're in a power crunch. And we are going in heavily for solar and offshore wind as well. That is, in fact, my job. I hope nobody from my main job is listening, but I don't think it's actually doing a very good job of replacing baseload energy. Because again, there's the out of phase issue, but I think what's actually more important is the intermittency. Because if it's out of phase with demand, you can always take some gas offline. That's, at least in Taiwan, where, we're projected to go up to 50% gas, uh, which is not very clever in a world where gas is becoming so expensive. Okay, you can always take some gas offline if it's out of phase with demand. But the problem is it's out of phase. Plus, it's very intermittent. You never know when the wind's going to be blowing. And while gas have some ability to, you can switch it on and off, up and down to some degree, it's just not optimal to always be adjusting to intermittent demand, unfortunately.
Yeah, you basically need a full fossil backup, and I fear that you know the way to replace wind these or to fill in for solar and wind when they go dead is gas peaker plants, and of course by putting more of this on the grid you need more of the gas, and it's a vicious circle, and I think Germany is finding this out. Europe in fact is finding this out right now with their the energy wind of Germany, where they shut down their nuclear and built as much wind and solar as they could over the last 15 years. They're completely dependent on Russian gas for their energy now because they have no stable source. And I just expect people to see this because I'm aware of it. Why isn't the world aware? How do we make the world aware of what's happening and what the solution is?
Well, I have to say, it's one of those things where I always try to think back to 2 years ago, when I was just, starting as a business reporter and I wasn't necessarily very aware of the nuclear issues. Before my journey, what could I have said to my past self? And it's very difficult because sometimes if if somebody holds an opinion and you tell them they're wrong, they just double down on that on that initial wrong opinion. It's really an art to insert um, counter programming in a way that doesn't set off that human reactive response of okay, you just told me I'm wrong. And I am offended now, and I'm going to tell you you're wrong. And once you're locked in that dynamic, there's basically no way to resuscitated. They're, even if you do somehow convince them rationally that you're right, they're not going to be uh, feeling warm and fuzzy about you or your technology. So I've discovered that the best way to talk about nuclear, of course, we should point out the fact that you know the Germans really you know, um, did do create a huge mess for themselves. We should point that out. We should point that out in the context of why nuclear is good. But I'm always talking up nuclear for its positive qualities. I'm always talking up the technology of nuclear. I'm always getting people to see nuclear um, as a well-rounded technology with a lot of that's why I talk about the different kinds of reactors. I get people to see how nuanced and interesting and full of potential nuclear is. I talk about the CANDU reactor. Goodness, another great thing about them is because they have that online refueling. They do still have that some of that research reactor DNA. You can make a lot of medical isotopes in there because you can put things in and then take things out on the other end. So when people catch details like that, they're just learning a neutral piece of information. It's like, hey, did you know that you know the CANDU reactor is the only commercial reactor where you can make short-lived medical isotopes like lutetium? And they're like, well, yeah, I guess I do use a lot. When I go to the doctors, they do use a lot of isotopes for medical care. I guess my father going in for his prostate cancer treatment did, they did need to use some lutetium or whatever. They make that connection when they're in a emotionally neutral or positive space. And that's actually the connections that you need to make so that they can challenge their prior assumptions without feeling like they themselves are being attacked. I think that is the way to go, but it's not always easy.
It's a good strategy. If for those of us who are in the trenches fighting this battle day by day and hearing the same tired arguments over and over again, we must sound crazy to the people who have been fed the main line. If I tell someone, no, nobody died in Fukushima. No, Chernobyl actually saved more people than it killed by offsetting coal for 14 years. People look at me like I'm crazy. And it's like, no, you these are all evil things. These are horrible things. But you have to ease people into these facts.
Yeah. I think that's a problem. You have to ease people in, and another thing is people really do shut down if you just throw too much information at once. You need to create that internal curiosity that gets them to want to reach for that next piece of information, like I did when I was starting to explore nuclear. And it was really like an adventure for me. It was like, no, I was like a detective because I felt like a detective because, I was meeting up with pro nuclear activists and, we'd be, it's funny because when I if I may boast for 1 minute, I am actually not just working in offshore wind in Taiwan. I'm Taiwan's number one offshore wind influencer. And I can waltz into like an industry function and everybody wants to buy me a drink. It's like, oh my God, Angelica's here. But when I meet up with nuclear activists, we all buy our own beers in this dingy little bar, and they'll just be like, "Oh, yeah," and this is what I look. This is what I learned. This is what's going on, and it's exciting. It actually feels more like reporting, and that to 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 bring people along with you on this journey of discovery um, is a lot more fun and a lot more effective. And I'm not living this every day. I've been called a nuclear bro many times on Twitter. It happens. And sometimes it's required. Sometimes, you can't be too polite. If somebody's full of bullshit, you should absolutely call them out on their bullshit. And, especially if they are, just a bad faith person online, the best thing you can do is just nail their bullshit to the wall. But you don't want to do that when it's your friend. You don't want to do that when it's somebody just parroting some some piece of those ideas almost become like memes, and they get passed around without a lot of reflection. And when somebody presents you with a piece of that information, how you react in that moment can be so powerful. And if you can react in a playful way, a joking way, or a light way that introduces another piece of information without the kind of "no, you're wrong, no, you're ignorant" energy, um, then you might have just made an ally rather than somebody who's going to clam up. You know.
It requires infinite patience and yeah, stay away from the ad hominems. Listen to their concerns and address them logically and with facts. And don't, yeah. I've had some success doing that, and sometimes you're arguing for the people that are listening. In fact, most of the time you're arguing for the silent listening majority who you're not going to convince the people that have come out loudly against nuclear, because it's too much of a personal change in a lot of cases for people to accept. Once they've positioned themselves as an enemy of nuclear on the internet, to go back on that is very difficult. And there are a few that have done that, and I praise them for being able to do that. That's a difficult and challenging thing to do, just to admit that you're wrong about something. So I really respect people that have been able to do that.
Yeah, and it's so important. I would say this, I feel like we are 40 minutes into this podcast. If you're listening to this, you're probably pro-nuclear, and if you're pro-nuclear and a part of the pro-nuclear community, I beg you, please. There's a lot of people who are in this community because they are able to stand up to social pressure for what's right, and then becoming right becomes so important to them, and they start making that a part of their identity to be right on every little thing. And then when you have a movement, you essentially have a bigger tent. And then you have a lot of people who are at loggerheads with each other, even though they agree on 95% of everything. But one has a pet technology. It's like, oh no, we should use molten salt reactors for everything. Oh no, we should use this other technology. And no, and it's so unnecessary.
Thorium.
I really thorium. Oh my god, the thorium bros. So we we really need to find a way to say yes and it's like, oh yes, that molten salt reactors can be great, and this can be great, and that can be great, and if we join together and amplify each other, hold each other up, explore each other technologies with curiosity, even if it's not our own pet solution, then we are going to be a more formidable force in the world. Um, and there's frankly, like, our biggest enemy is not anybody who's pro nuclear at all, even the ones that we think are, not on the right path, or, um, it's the vast um, vast percentage of normies who just simply are a bit oblivious. They might be anti-nuclear. They might be even just, nuclear oblivious. And that's the inertia we have to overcome to get nuclear rolling in this world.
Yeah, and that takes a lot of just individual conversations and patience, and an army of people willing to go out there and talk to these people and just give them these facts.
And I'm gonna sound a little bit, I know this is the rational mind, but I'm gonna go a little bit of woo-woo here, Al. I believe that, you really, it's when you get down to it, let's talk about love. Let's talk about love for this technology. I really do believe that love is infectious, and when you truly love something, you don't get tired of defending it. You don't get tired that you're not meeting your KPIs or something, because I truly believe this technology is so cool. I truly believe this technology has so much potential. Just talking about nuclear power gives me more energy to keep talking about nuclear power. So I am a self-sustaining chain reaction in and of myself. And to the extent that I can make an impact in the world, that's great. But you have that love that's self-sustaining. You reach out to community so that your community becomes self-sustaining, self-nourishing. It becomes, and I have found this to be true, like the pro-nuclear community. Yes, there are a few like oddballs, whatever, but in general, very friendly, very nice, very mutually supporting. And then you just take that energy and you spread it outwards, and hopefully we can reach a stage when people think about the pro-nuclear community, they'll think, oh my God, they're so amazing in that they're, you know, willing to share information, willing to sit down and explain, and just radiate that love for fact and knowledge and truth and all technology, of course, but also for each other, and for ultimately what nuclear can do for the world. Because you know, ultimately, it's a technology, and technology um, is useful because we as human beings, we have needs. And I believe that nuclear ultimately can lift so many people out of poverty. Uh, to electrify the world to the extent that people want to in order to save the planet. We're talking about not just replacing the current grid. We might have to 3 times, 4 times our grid to electrify our transportation, electrify our heavy industries. Um, and I believe that nuclear has the ability to do that. Let us keep our standard of living and give those in the third world a decent, comparable standard of living through abundant power. Ultimately, that's what it's about.
That's a great message, Angelica. Thank you so much for coming on my show and chatting with me about nuclear energy and your advocacy. So that was Angelica Oung, a journalist from Taiwan, discussing nuclear advocacy and communicating for energy policy in a polarized medium. We got cut off at the end there. Internet between Ottawa and Taiwan went down for a little bit. But I'd like to thank Angelica for joining me on The Rational View. I'm going to fire off a t-shirt to her for coming on the show. Thank you for listening, and I hope you stay tuned to The Rational View. If you'd like to follow up with more in-depth discussions, please come find us on Facebook at The Rational View and join our discussion group. If you like what you're hearing, please consider visiting my Patreon page at patron.podbean.com/therationalview. Thanks for listening.